I wanted to ask what you could tell us about this informal group that Martin Luther King used to convene that he called the Blob.
Well, let me tell you first about the Blob. That was a common name for all groups that met sort of secretly together and that were not formally established. Mm-hmm. That's why they were called the Blob.
But what kind of things did King want to hear from the people that he called part of his Blob?
Well, he wanted to get a good fix on the mood of the various aspects of the black community. Mm-hmm. How did they really feel about integration, and did they feel that there were things that, for them, economic things that were much more important than this sort of vague desire for integration, but they didn't know exactly which particular item they were strong for, and that would be a subject of many.
And you were there because you had worked on this school integration project, Project Hope, that he supervised.
I don't know why I was there. They asked some white representatives, and a couple of people recommended me, and Fran, very, very well-known integration from years back, and I was with her because she was sort of a rough speaker, and they wanted to make sure that if something got in the newspapers, it was not going to be, well, I told them, honey, they were stark raving, not my sugar, but crazy.
But I thought the whole point of the Blob was that it wasn't a public group, that it was an informal group of advisors that he could call on.
Yes, but after a while it got to be a fairly rigid group. This one is in and that one is out. And it was these few people that were making the decision. And there was a lot of futzing around with it because the Blob was paid for by the Ford Foundation in many of its activities. That was supposed to be a big secret, but everybody knew it. So people were vying to get directly with the Ford Foundation, so they didn't have to, sort of creep up to them and say how much we love you and all that sort of thing. They could say honestly what they thought the program should be, and if Ford liked it, they would pay for it.
And about how many people would show up at these meetings?
Well, sometimes it was, that's hard to say. Sometimes it was by invitation. Sometimes people would be told, like me, this is not formal, and we don't say we're not going to accept anything you say, and we're not going to say that we're going to accept everything that you say. We're just trying to get the feeling of what people in this community feel. So they wanted to stay away from an organized group that they would then be stuck with. And I can't tell you much more than that. I came and went with that, but I don't know what they accomplished. Mm-hmm. But my feeling was any of those kind of meetings with people who hadn't met before, and any of those kind of developments that nobody had ever heard of before, was worthwhile.
Why did they invite you into the Blob?
Well, I was active in several of the groups that they were interested in, and they knew that I was invited to many things to help them get started or to help them pick people to be on their group or whatever. That's why.
And was Martin Luther King different in a smaller setting than his public persona? Or was he the same person?
Was he different in a smaller city?
When you met with him in a small group, was he a different person than the person you see giving speeches?
Oh, very much so. I mean, he used very language, very uh, um, uh, everyday language, or he used he didn't use swear words or anything, but he was never as sweet and as we're all together in this blah blah blah. It was much more down to earth. And he generally was in a place where he had been called to. Why don't you go and sit with these people and see if you can't get them to talk together rather than quarrel together? And he was just very good at that.
And what about some of the other people who showed up? Do you have any particular memories of other people?
Well, mostly they were people who were called to the scene by King and his group, or people at that level who wanted to make sure that they just weren't get people at the very top or the very bottom. They wanted people who represented regular middle class people in the black community. And that's what they got. And that's why they were successful.
I think you told me you once met Rosa Parks.
Yes, somebody else's group. I was in a very small group.
Mm-hmm.
She's a very interesting person. I tended to think of her as being just a public figure, but she invented herself. She was smart and knew what she was doing and made the most of her abilities. She's quite impressive.
Yeah.
But I didn't really have anything to do with her. How do you do? I think what you're doing is wonderful. Blah 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 blah.
No, I know you knew Julian Bond when he was just starting out.
What?
I know you knew Julian Bond when he was just starting out. When he was
19 years old.
Yeah, and you knew he would go places.
Oh yeah, everybody knew that he was going places. What was it that he did? He when he was elected to the
Georgia State Legislature.
That's what the word I couldn't get was legislature.
Yeah.
He was elected to that with both white and black voters. It was a very surprising victory for those who didn't know what was going on. But for those who followed what was going on, he was a sure bet, but everybody else was very surprised. And they were talking about buying elections and all that sort of crap. He won his election, and fairly. Part of it was because he's very good looking. It's my opinion.
Yeah. But then his first major speech, which opposed U.S. intervention in Vietnam, the legislature voted to expel him.
Yeah.
And that's when the ACLU got into defending his right to serve his term.
Yeah, but he had been hanging around in the ACLU because he knew he was going to say something where he would be needed. And everybody in the ACLU knew him. He was an activist kind of a guy. And for a while he was hanging around with me to get me to introduce him to all the ACLU people, which I did. He's a nice guy.
Well, after he left Georgia, he also moved to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
He had I think for a while he was the head of the NAACP. When he retired, he moved to Chevy Chase, not too far from you.
Yeah.
And after he died, they created a memorial bench for him at the Chevy Chase bus stop.